400 years of existence, and nothing had ever lingered on my tongue quite like the memory of her. I am Celine, keeper of shadows, drinker of moonlight, and I have tasted the blood of kings and peasants alike. Yet none of them stayed with me the way she did, sweet Clara with her fumbling hands and eyes like autumn mornings. I remember the precise moment our worlds collided. It was a Tuesday evening in October, when the veil between seasons grows thin and even mortals can sense the magic threading through the air. I had been walking the cobblestone streets of Raven's Hollow, this small town I'd chosen for its isolation and abundance of shadows, when she rounded the corner carrying an armload of books that seemed determined to escape her grasp. The collision was inevitable. Books scattered like startled birds across the wet pavement, their pages fluttering in the evening breeze. She dropped to her knees immediately, gathering them with desperate care, mumbling apologies to the darkness. I stood frozen, watching her gentle hands rescue each volume from the dampness, her brown hair falling like a curtain around her face. When she finally looked up at me, those eyes, warm amber flecked with gold, held no fear. Only curiosity. Only kindness. In that moment, something in my chest that had been dormant for decades stirred to life. A hunger that had nothing to do with blood awakened within me. I should have walked away. I should have melted back into the shadows where I belonged. Instead, I found myself kneeling beside her, helping gather the scattered books, inhaling the scent of vanilla and old paper that clung to her skin. Our fingers brushed as we reached for the same volume, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, and the touch sent electricity racing through my immortal veins. She whispered a thank you, her voice like honey over gravel, and disappeared into the night. But she left something behind in that brief encounter. She left a crack in the ice that had formed around my heart centuries ago. A crack that would soon become a chasm, threatening to swallow my carefully constructed solitude whole. I had tasted centuries of darkness, centuries of emptiness. But nothing ever stayed. Until her. Clara Winters had come to Raven's Hollow to disappear. The death of her mother 6 months earlier had left her untethered, floating through life like a ghost searching for purpose. She'd inherited a small sum of money and a desperate need for solitude, both of which led her to this forgotten town nestled between ancient forests and rolling hills. The cottage she rented sat at the edge of town, its stone walls covered in ivy that whispered secrets to the wind. She'd taken a job at Moonrise Books, a dusty little shop that smelled of leather bindings and forgotten dreams. The owner, Mrs. Holloway, was a kind woman in her 70s who asked few questions and seemed grateful for the help. Clara found peace in the routine of cataloging books, dusting shelves, and helping the occasional customer find exactly what they were looking for. She preferred the evening shifts, when the golden light of sunset painted everything in watercolors and the world felt softer around the edges. It was during one of these evening walks home that she encountered the stranger again. Clara had been carrying a box of rare books to Mrs. Holloway's personal collection when she stumbled, literally, into the woman from that night a week ago. This time, Clara managed to keep her grip on the box, though her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The woman stood like a statue carved from moonlight and shadow. Tall and elegant, with platinum hair that caught the dying light and skin so pale it seemed to glow from within. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and infinite, holding depths that spoke of centuries rather than years. "Careful," the stranger said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Clara couldn't place. Something old and European, like wine aged in forgotten cellars. "The streets can be treacherous after dark." There was something in the way she said it, a warning wrapped in silk that made Clara's pulse quicken. But not with fear. With something far more dangerous, intrigue. "I'm usually more graceful than this," Clara replied, adjusting her grip on the box. "You must think I make a habit of throwing books at strangers." The corner of the woman's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "Almost." I think you're someone who loves books enough to risk her life protecting them. They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Clara noticed the woman's skin had an unusual coolness to it, as if she'd been walking in winter while everyone else enjoyed autumn. She noticed, too, the way the woman's eyes seemed to drink in the fading light, storing it away like a secret. "I'm Clara," she offered, shifting the weight of the box. The woman hesitated as if giving her name might grant Clara some power over her. Celine. The name fit her perfectly. Moon goddess, silver light in darkness. Clara wanted to say it aloud, to taste it on her tongue, but something in Celine's posture suggested the conversation was over. She stepped back, creating distance where Clara wished there were none. "Be careful walking alone at night, Clara," Celine said, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "Not all strangers in the dark have good intentions." Before Clara could respond, Celine had vanished into the shadows between streetlights, leaving Clara standing alone with her box of books and 100 questions burning on her lips. In the days that followed, Clara found herself looking for Celine in every shadow, listening for that distinctive voice in every whisper of wind. She began taking longer walks in the evening, telling herself it was for the exercise, knowing it was really in hopes of another encounter. Celine, for her part, was fighting a battle she hadn't faced in decades. She watched Clara from the darkness, drawn to her warmth like a moth to flame, even knowing she could only bring coldness to the girl's life. She told herself it was protection. There were other dangers in Raven's Hollow than just her own nature. Old enemies, territorial disputes between supernatural creatures, hunters who still remembered her name from centuries past. But truthfully, she simply couldn't stay away. Their third meeting happened on a foggy Thursday night outside the old cemetery. Clara had been visiting her mother's grave. She'd had the body moved here when she relocated, needing to keep that connection close. She was walking home through the mist when she heard footsteps behind her, matching her pace too precisely to be coincidental. She turned to find Celine emerging from the fog like a dream-given form, her pale coat billowing around her like wings. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Celine said, falling into step beside her without invitation. "Are you following me?" Clara asked, but there was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. "Yes." The honesty was surprising. Celine had expected to offer some excuse, some reasonable explanation for her presence. Instead, the truth spilled from her lips like wine from a broken glass. They walked in comfortable silence for several blocks, their footsteps creating a rhythm against the cobblestones. Clara noticed that Celine moved without sound, as if her feet barely touched the ground. She noticed, too, the way cats scattered when they approached, and how the streetlights seemed to dim in Celine's presence. "Why?" Clara asked finally. Celine stopped walking. In the amber glow of a street lamp, her features looked carved from marble, beautiful and distant and impossibly sad. "Because you remind me of someone I used to be." "Who were you?" "Someone who believed in happy endings." Celine's smile was bitter as winter wind. "Someone who thought love was enough to conquer anything." Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in Celine's gray eyes, close enough to notice the absence of breath misting in the cold air. "What changed your mind?" "Time." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. "Time changes everything, Clara. It steals warmth and hope and leaves only hunger in their place." There was pain in Celine's voice, centuries of it, and Clara found herself reaching out instinctively to offer comfort. Her warm fingers brushed against Celine's cold cheek, and the vampire went utterly still. The touch lasted only seconds, but it burned through Celine like holy fire. Clara's skin was soft and alive, pulsing with the rhythm of her heartbeat, radiating a heat that Celine hadn't felt in decades. For a moment she allowed herself to lean into that warmth, to remember what it felt like to be touched with tenderness instead of fear. Then reality crashed back and she pulled away. "Stay away from me, Clara," she said, backing into the shadows. "I'm not safe for someone like you." But even as she spoke the words, even as she watched hurt flicker across Clara's beautiful face, Celine knew it was already too late. The crack in her heart had become a chasm, and Clara's light was pouring in like molten gold, melting the ice she'd built around herself over centuries of solitude. She disappeared into the night, leaving Clara standing alone under the street lamp, her hands still tingling from the brief contact, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously like falling. 3 weeks passed before they saw each other again. Clara had respected Celine's request for distance, though it cost her more than she cared to admit. She'd found herself thinking about the strange, beautiful woman at odd moments, while organizing books, while brewing tea, while lying in bed listening to the wind howl through the eaves of her cottage. The blood moon rose on Halloween night, painting the world in shades of crimson and shadow. Clara had worked late at the bookstore, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare for the town's small Halloween festival. She was walking home alone, her arms full of decorative gourds and autumn leaves, when she heard the footsteps behind her. These weren't Celine's silent steps. These were heavy, deliberate, predatory. Clara quickened her pace, her heart beginning to race as the footsteps matched her speed. She turned down Elm Street, hoping to lose her pursuer in the maze of residential blocks, but the footsteps followed. The man caught up with her 2 blocks from her cottage, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. He was large and smelled of alcohol and unwashed clothes, his eyes glittering with malicious intent. The gourds scattered across the pavement as Clara tried to pull away. "Pretty little thing walking alone on Halloween," he slurred, his grip tightening. "Don't you know what kinds of monsters come out on nights like this?" Clara's scream caught in her throat as he pressed her against the brick wall of an alley, his other hand reaching for her purse. She closed her eyes, preparing for the worst, when suddenly the weight of him was gone. She opened her eyes to find her attacker suspended 3 feet off the ground, held aloft by a hand wrapped around his throat. Celine stood behind him, her face transformed by rage into something beautiful and terrible. Her eyes had turned from gray to silver, glowing in the moonlight, and when she spoke, Clara glimpsed fangs like ivory daggers. "She is under my protection," Celine said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Touch her again and I will show you what real monsters can do." The man made a choking sound, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. Celine held him there for a moment that stretched like eternity, then released him. He hit the ground hard, scrambled to his feet and ran into the night without looking back. Clara stood frozen against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at Celine. The vampire's features slowly returned to normal, the silver fading from her eyes, the fangs retracting. But the truth hung between them now, impossible to ignore. "You're..." Clara began, her voice barely a whisper. "A monster," Celine finished, not meeting her eyes. "Everything your nightmares warned you about." But Clara surprised them both by stepping forward instead of running away. She reached up and touched Celine's face again, her fingers tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. "You saved me," Clara said simply. "Monsters don't save people." Celine caught Clara's wrist gently, holding her hand against her cheek. "You should be afraid of me." "I should be afraid of a lot of things," Clara replied. "But I'm not afraid of you." They stood there in the blood-red moonlight, predator and prey, monster and maiden, both of them trembling with the weight of what had been revealed. Celine searched Clara's face for disgust, for terror, for any sign that this beautiful, brave woman would finally come to her senses and run. Instead, she found only acceptance, only trust, only the same warm curiosity that had drawn her like a magnet from the very beginning. "What are you?" Clara asked, though they both knew she already understood. "Old," Celine said. Lonely. Cursed to watch everything I care about turn to dust. How old? 437 years. The number fell between them like a confession. I was turned during the reign of Elizabeth I, when London was plague and fire and desperate prayers to uncaring gods. Clara absorbed this information with surprising calm. That's why you're so sad. You've lost everyone you've ever loved. The simple observation hit Celine like a physical blow. In all her centuries, no one had ever seen through to the heart of her pain so clearly, so compassionately. She felt tears she didn't know she could still shed gather in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Everyone. Clara stepped closer, eliminating the last inches between them. Not everyone. Not yet. What followed was the sweetest torture Celine had ever known. Against every instinct, every lesson learned from centuries of loss, she began spending her nights with Clara. They met after sunset when the bookstore closed and Clara's workday ended, embarking on long walks through the town's quiet streets or sitting in Clara's cottage drinking tea and talking until dawn painted the eastern sky. Clara was hungry for stories, and Celine found herself sharing memories she'd locked away for decades. She told Clara about the London of her youth, when the Thames ran black with coal smoke and the streets echoed with the cries of merchants selling everything from hot pies to salvation. She described the court of Elizabeth, where she'd served as a lady-in-waiting before her transformation, and the night she'd been turned by a vampire who claimed to love her but had really only loved her blood. Her name was Magdalena, Celine said one evening as they sat before Clara's fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She was beautiful and cruel and completely mad. She turned me because she was lonely, then abandoned me to figure out what I'd become on my own. Clara curled deeper into the armchair she'd claimed as her own, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. That must have been terrifying. Terrifying. Heartbreaking. Liberating. Celine's laugh held no humor. I learned that immortality is a gift only if you have something worth living forever for. And you never found anything? Celine looked at Clara, then really looked at her. The way the firelight turned her brown hair to burnished copper, the gentle curve of her lips as she smiled, the absolute trust in her amber eyes. Not until now. The words hung between them like a bridge, and Clara felt her breath catch. She set down her tea and moved to the couch where Celine sat, close enough to feel the coolness that radiated from the vampire's skin. Tell me about the good times, Clara said softly. Surely there must have been some joy in 4 centuries. So Celine told her about the Renaissance artist she'd posed for, back when her kind could still be captured in paintings. She described the first time she'd seen the ocean from the deck of a ship bound for the New World, and the night she'd watched Shakespeare perform Hamlet in the Globe Theatre. She spoke of the libraries she'd haunted, the books she'd read, the languages she'd learned in her endless quest to fill the hollow spaces inside herself. You've lived 1,000 lifetimes, Clara marveled. Seen the world change and grow. That's not a curse, that's a gift. Is it? Celine asked. When everyone you care about withers and dies while you remain unchanged. When you watch civilizations rise and fall, knowing that nothing you do will matter in the end. Clara reached out and took Celine's hand, marveling at how the vampire's fingers were both strong and delicate, like carved ice that might shatter at the wrong touch. It matters to me. Right now in this moment it matters. For the first time in decades, Celine laughed. Really laughed with genuine joy instead of bitter irony. The sound was like silver bells in the wind, and it made Clara's heart skip with happiness. You have a gift for finding light in the darkest places, Celine said, squeezing Clara's hand gently. Maybe that's why we found each other, Clara replied. Maybe you need someone to remind you that the world is still beautiful, and I need someone to remind me that I'm brave enough to live in it. They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands entwined, watching the fire burn lower in the grate. Neither of them spoke the word that was growing between them like a flower in winter soil, but both of them felt it taking root, spreading warmth through the cold spaces in their hearts. Love. Impossible, impractical, inevitable love. November brought frost to Raven's Hollow, painting the windows with intricate patterns and turning breath to mist in the cold air. Clara's cottage became a sanctuary where she and Celine could exist outside the normal flow of time, sharing stories and silences, learning the rhythm of each other's hearts, or in Celine's case, the rhythm of what had once been a heart. It was on a night when snow fell like scattered stars that everything changed between them. Clara had been organizing her mother's belongings, finally ready to sort through the boxes she'd brought from their old home. Celine sat nearby, offering silent support as Clara carefully unwrapped treasures and memories. At the bottom of one box, Clara found her mother's old record player and a collection of vinyl albums from the 1940s and 50s. Her mother had loved to dance, had met Clara's father at a USO dance during the war, and music had always filled their home. She used to dance while she cooked dinner, Clara said, running her fingers over the worn album covers. Said it made everything taste better when it was prepared with joy. On impulse, she set up the record player and selected an album of slow jazz standards. The needle found the groove with a soft pop, and suddenly the cottage was filled with the smoky voice of a long-dead singer crooning about love and loss and the way time slips through your fingers like water. Clara stood and held out her hand to Celine. "Dance with me." Celine stared at the offered hand as if it might burn her. I haven't danced in." "Then it's time," Clara said simply. Celine rose slowly, taking Clara's hand with the reverence of someone being offered a sacred gift. They moved together tentatively at first, finding their rhythm, learning the shape of each other in motion. Clara was warm and alive in Celine's arms, her heartbeat a steady drum against the vampire's chest. Celine was graceful and sure, guiding Clara through steps that came from centuries of practice. They danced through 3 songs, growing closer with each passing moment, until they were barely moving, just swaying in each other's arms while the music painted pictures in the air around them. Clara looked up into Celine's face and saw wonder there, as if the vampire was seeing colors for the first time. "Clara," Celine whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "I know," Clara replied, understanding without need for explanation. The kiss began like the falling snow, soft, tentative, a whisper of possibility. But it grew into something fierce and desperate, for centuries of loneliness meeting a lifetime of longing in the space between heartbeats. Celine's lips were cool against Clara's warmth, but they heated under the pressure of the kiss, as if Clara's life force was enough to wake even dead things. Clara tasted like honey and tea and dreams that might actually come true. Celine tasted like wine and midnight and promises that could span eternity. They broke apart only when Clara needed to breathe, their foreheads pressed together, sharing the same small space of air. "I love you," Clara said, the words falling from her lips like flower petals. "I know I shouldn't, I know it's impossible, but I love you." Celine closed her eyes, feeling something she'd thought permanently broken stir to life in her chest. "Clara, you don't understand what you're saying. I'm not human. I can't give you a normal life, can't give you children or growing old together or—" Clara silenced her with another kiss, shorter but no less intense. "I don't want normal. I want you. However long we have, whatever challenges we face, I want you." Celine pulled back to search Clara's face, looking for doubt, for fear, for any sign that this beautiful woman didn't understand what she was offering. Instead, she found only love, pure, honest, unwavering love that threatened to undo 4 centuries of carefully constructed emotional armor. "I love you too," Celine whispered, the words torn from her throat like a confession. "God help me, I love you too." They kissed again, deeper this time, with the passion of two souls recognizing their perfect match across impossible odds. The record player continued spinning, filling the cottage with music that seemed to bless their union, while snow fell outside like confetti celebrating the miracle of two hearts becoming one. In that moment, pressed against each other in the warm glow of firelight, neither of them thought about the future or the challenges it might bring. There was only now, only this, only love strong enough to bridge the gap between life and death, mortal and immortal, hope and despair. Time had stopped, or perhaps they had simply stepped outside its flow, existing in a pocket of perfect happiness that would burn bright in their memories forever. December arrived with unusual warmth, as if the season itself was holding its breath. Clara had been experiencing what she called tired days more frequently. Mornings when getting out of bed felt like swimming through molasses, afternoons when a simple walk to the bookstore left her breathless and dizzy. She blamed it on the change of seasons, on the emotional upheaval of falling in love with someone who challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. She made excuses when Celine noticed her increasing pallor, her tendency to fall asleep in the middle of conversations, the way she'd started wearing scarves to hide the bruises on her throat. Bruises that had nothing to do with vampire bites and everything to do with blood vessels too weak to contain the life flowing through them. Celine, with her supernatural senses, noticed everything. The change in Clara's scent, still vanilla and old books, but now underlaid with something metallic and wrong. The way Clara's heartbeat had grown irregular, sometimes racing, sometimes faltering like a bird with a broken wing. The increasing translucency of her skin, as if she was slowly fading from the world. But Clara had asked her not to pry, had insisted she was simply adjusting to the onset of winter, and Celine respected her wishes even as worry gnawed at her like hunger. She'd learned to trust Clara's judgment in the months they'd known each other, had come to depend on her lover's innate wisdom about human matters. It was Mrs. Holloway who finally forced the truth into the open. Clara had fainted at work, collapsing behind the counter while shelving returns. Mrs. Holloway found her 20 minutes later, pale as winter moonlight and burning with fever. The older woman called an ambulance despite Clara's weak protests, and by evening Clara was installed in a hospital bed with 4 tubes snaking from her arms like plastic vines. The doctor was young, kind, and devastatingly honest. The blood tests revealed what Clara had been hiding for months: acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive and already advanced. The bruises, the fatigue, the frequent infections she dismissed as winter colds, all symptoms of a disease that was quietly dismantling her body from the inside. "How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" Dr. Reeves asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Clara stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in the acoustic panels. "Since before I moved here. 6 months, maybe 7. "And you didn't seek treatment?" "I watched my mother die of cancer," Clara said quietly. "Months of chemotherapy that made her sicker than the disease, surgery that left her in constant pain, radiation that burned her skin and stole her hair. In the end she died anyway, just more slowly and with more suffering." Dr. Reeves frowned. "Ms. Winters, treatments have improved significantly. With aggressive therapy we could potentially—" "No." Clara's voice was firm. "I want to know how long I have, not how many ways you can torture me while I die." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken arguments. Finally, Dr. Reeves closed her chart and sat down in the plastic chair beside her bed. "Without treatment? 3 months, maybe 4 if you're lucky." Clara nodded, surprised by how calm she felt. She'd known on some level that death was stalking her. The only surprise was how little time remained. Celine arrived at sunset, moving through the hospital corridors like a shadow. She'd felt Clara's distress like a physical pain, had known something was wrong from the moment Clara's emotions spiked with fear and despair. Hospital security meant nothing to a vampire who could bend minds with a thought, and she was beside Clara's bed before the nurses even knew she was there. "Why didn't you tell me?" Celine asked, her voice breaking on the words. Clara turned to look at her, this impossible woman who had brought light back into her world just in time for darkness to claim her. "Because I wanted to be happy. For the first time in years I was genuinely happy, and I knew that telling you would change everything." Celine sank into the chair Dr. Reeves had vacated, reaching out to take Clara's hand. Her touch was cool and steady, anchoring Clara to the present moment. "There are ways," Celine said quietly. "Options that doctors don't know about." Clara understood immediately what she was suggesting. "You want to turn me. I want you to live." The words came out fierce, desperate. "I can't lose you, Clara. Not when I've just found you. Not when you've taught me how to feel human again." Clara studied Celine's face, seeing centuries of loss reflected in those storm-gray eyes. She thought about eternity, about what it would mean to trade her humanity for immortality, to become something that existed in the spaces between heartbeats. "I need time to think," she said finally. Celine nodded, though Clara could see the effort it cost her to accept that answer. "Time is the one thing I can't give you more of." Outside the hospital window, snow began to fall again, each flake a tiny reminder of how beautiful and fragile life could be. Clara watched it accumulate on the glass and wondered if she was brave enough to choose forever, or if some gifts were too precious to accept. Clara came home to her cottage 3 days later, armed with bottles of morphine and a hospice nurse who would visit twice a week. She'd refused the hospital's offer of aggressive treatment, choosing instead to face her remaining time on her own terms. The cottage welcomed her back like an old friend, its familiar warmth a stark contrast to the sterile chill of the hospital. Celine had respected Clara's need for space, appearing only after sunset and leaving before dawn, but her presence filled the spaces between Clara's waking hours like music half remembered from dreams. She brought books Clara had mentioned wanting to read, flowers that bloomed impossibly in the winter cold, and her own quiet strength when Clara needed someone to lean against. They didn't speak of turning, of immortality, of the choice that hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. Instead they talked about everything else. Clara's childhood, Celine's memories of long-dead poets, the way snow looked different when viewed through centuries of experience versus months of anticipation. It was during one of these conversations, as Clara dozed against Celine's shoulder while firelight painted shadows on the walls, that the vampire finally broke their unspoken agreement to avoid the subject. "I turned someone once before," Celine said quietly, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "In 1823 in Prague. Her name was Isabel and she was dying of consumption." Clara stirred but didn't open her eyes, sensing that this story needed to be told in darkness, in the space between sleeping and waking where truth lived most comfortably. "She begged me to save her," Celine continued. "Said she wasn't ready to die, that there were too many things she still wanted to see and do. So I turned her, gave her forever instead of months." "What happened?" Celine's arm tightened around Clara, as if she could hold her safe from the pain of the past. She hated what she became. Hated the hunger, the isolation, the way the sun became an enemy instead of a friend. She blamed me for stealing her humanity, for making her into a monster. After 50 years she walked into the sunrise and burned to ash, cursing my name as she died. Clara opened her eyes then, looking up into Celine's face. In the firelight, the vampire looked every one of her 4 centuries, weighted down by memories of loss and mistake. "That's why you won't ask me to choose," Clara said, understanding flooding through her. "You're afraid I'll hate you for it." "I'm afraid you'll hate what you become," Celine corrected. "I'm afraid I'll take away everything that makes you you, and you'll spend eternity regretting the choice." Clara shifted in Celine's arms, turning so they were face to face. "Do you really think I'm that fragile? That weak?" I think you're human, Celine replied. Beautifully, perfectly human. And I love that about you. I love your warmth, your mortality, the way you make every moment count because you know how precious time is. And you think becoming like you would change that? Celine was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if it might hold answers to questions she'd been asking for centuries. I think becoming like me would change everything. And I'm selfish enough to want you forever, but I love you enough to want you happy more than I want you mine. Clara reached up and touched Celine's cheek, feeling the marble smoothness of immortal skin. What if I told you that being with you for however long we have, has already changed everything? What if I told you that you've taught me to be brave, to reach for things I want instead of settling for what feels safe? Clara. I'm dying, Celine. In 3 months, maybe 4, I'll be gone whether I choose to become like you or not. The only question is whether I die as I am or whether I choose to live as something new. Celine closed her eyes and Clara saw tears slip from beneath her lashes, tears that sparkled like diamonds in the firelight. I can't make that choice for you. I'm not asking you to, Clara said softly. I'm asking you to make it with me. When the time comes, when the pain gets too bad and the morphine stops working, I'm asking you to help me trade dying for living. Celine opened her eyes and Clara saw centuries of love and loss and hard-won wisdom reflected there. Are you sure? I'm sure I love you, Clara replied. I'm sure I want more time with you than 3 months. I'm sure that dying afraid and alone is worse than living forever and facing whatever comes next together. Celine kissed her then, soft and sweet and desperate, tasting salt tears and promises that might survive the end of the world. When they broke apart, Clara saw something in the vampire's eyes that looked dangerously like hope. When you're ready, Celine whispered against Clara's lips. When you're certain. I'll give you forever if that's what you choose. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, 2 hearts, one beating, one still, synchronized their rhythm with the ancient dance of love, choosing courage over fear, forever over never, each other over everything else. January brought the worst cold snap Raven's Hollow had seen in decades. The ancient pipes in Clara's cottage groaned and threatened to freeze, and ice formed on the inside of windows despite the fire that burned constantly in the hearth. Clara spent most of her days wrapped in blankets, too weak now to venture far from bed, her body finally surrendering to the disease that had been slowly claiming her for months. The morphine helped with the pain but left her floating in a twilight world between waking and sleeping, where Celine's cool presence was the only anchor keeping her tethered to reality. The vampire rarely left her side now, having abandoned all pretense of maintaining her nocturnal schedule. She read to Clara from books of poetry, brushed her hair when Clara was too weak to manage it herself, and held her through the increasingly frequent episodes when pain broke through the medication like fire through paper. Dr. Reeves had been honest about what the end would look like. The leukemia would steal Clara's strength first, then her breath, then finally her heartbeat. She would fade gradually, then all at once like a candle burning down to nothing. He'd increased her morphine dosage twice in the past week, but they were approaching the limits of what her failing body could process. It was on a night when the wind howled like something wild and wounded that Clara made her final decision. She'd been drifting in and out of consciousness for hours, her breathing shallow and labored, when suddenly she opened her eyes with startling clarity. "Celine," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. Celine was beside her instantly, taking Clara's hand in both of hers. "I'm here, my love. It's time." The words came out steady despite the effort it took to speak. "I can feel it. The darkness is getting closer and I'm tired of fighting it." Celine's grip tightened. "Are you certain? Once we begin, there's no going back." Clara managed a weak smile. "I've been certain since the night you saved me in that alley. I just needed time to say goodbye to being human. And have you said goodbye? Clara looked around the cottage that had become their sanctuary, at the books scattered on every surface, the dying fire in the grate, the photographs of her mother on the mantelpiece. She thought about her mortal life, its joys and sorrows, the way it had led her inevitably to this moment, to this choice, to this woman who had become her entire world. Yes, she said simply. I'm ready to say hello to whatever comes next. Celine leaned down and kissed Clara's forehead, tasting salt and sorrow and the metallic tang of approaching death. I need you to understand what will happen. The transformation. It's not gentle. You'll die first, truly die before the change brings you back. And when you wake you'll be different. The hunger will be overwhelming and the world will seem too bright, too loud, too much. Will I still love you? The question caught Celine off guard with its simplicity, its faith. Yes. Love survives the change. Love is what makes us more than just monsters. Clara nodded as if that was all she needed to know. Then I'm not afraid. But Celine was afraid, terrified actually. Afraid that something would go wrong, that Clara would be lost in the transformation, that she would wake up as someone else entirely. Afraid that she was making the same mistake she'd made with Isabel, stealing humanity from someone who might regret the trade for eternity. As if reading her thoughts, Clara squeezed Celine's hand with what little strength she had left. This isn't the same as before. I'm not her and you're not the same person you were then. We're choosing this together, eyes wide open. Celine nodded, swallowing the fear that threatened to choke her. She'd lived through centuries of loss, but this was different. This was choosing to risk everything on love, on hope, on the possibility that forever might actually mean something when shared with the right person. I love you, Celine whispered. In this life and whatever comes after. I love you too, Clara replied. Now and always. Celine helped Clara sit up, supporting her weight as they moved to the window that faced the forest behind the cottage. Outside, snow fell in heavy curtains and the ancient trees bent beneath the weight of wind and ice. It seemed fitting somehow to make this choice while the world transformed itself around them. Celine bit into her own wrist, opening a vein that flowed with blood dark as wine. She offered it to Clara, who took it without hesitation, her lips warm against Celine's cold skin. The vampire blood tasted like copper and starlight, like promises written in a language older than words. Clara drank until Celine gently pulled away, then lay back against the pillows, her eyes already growing heavy. How long? She asked. Hours. Maybe less. Celine stroked Clara's hair, memorizing the silky texture while it was still warm with human life. Sleep now. When you wake, we'll have forever to learn each other all over again. Clara's eyes fluttered closed and her breathing gradually slowed, then stopped entirely. For a moment that lasted an eternity, she was simply gone. No heartbeat, no breath, no spark of life in her still form. Celine held her breath too, waiting, praying to gods she'd stopped believing in centuries ago. Then Clara gasped, her back arching as new life flooded through her veins. Her eyes snapped open, revealing irises that had shifted from amber to silver, and when she smiled, Celine glimpsed the delicate points of newly formed fangs. Hello, Clara said, her voice carrying new depths, new music. I think I'd like to see what forever looks like. Celine laughed through her tears, gathering her transformed lover into her arms. Outside, the storm began to calm as if the world itself was settling into this new reality where love had conquered death, where two hearts could beat as one even when neither technically beat at all. Clara's rebirth was nothing like Celine had expected. Where Isabel had emerged from transformation wild and frightened, consumed by bloodlust and confusion, Clara woke with an almost supernatural calm. She sat up slowly in Celine's arms, taking inventory of her transformed body with the methodical curiosity that had always been part of her nature. Everything is so. Clara paused, searching for words to describe the overwhelming intensity of her new senses. Loud. Bright. I can hear your thoughts. You can't actually hear my thoughts, Celine said gently, though she was amazed by Clara's composure. You're sensing my emotions. That connection will fade as you learn to control your new abilities. Clara turned to study Celine's face, and the vampire caught her breath. Clara's transformation had enhanced her beauty, sharpening her features into something almost ethereal while maintaining the warmth that had always been her defining characteristic. Her skin was pale now but luminous, as if lit from within by moonlight. I'm hungry, Clara said, and there was wonder in her voice rather than fear. But not for food. For... She tilted her head, trying to identify the craving that gnawed at her newly awakened consciousness. Blood, Celine finished. The hunger is different for everyone, but it's always there. A constant companion you'll learn to manage rather than eliminate. Clara nodded, accepting this information with the same equanimity she'd shown throughout their courtship. Will you teach me how to feed without killing, how to exist in the world without drawing attention? I'll teach you everything, Celine promised. But first we need to leave Raven's Hollow. Your transformation won't go unnoticed for long, and there are people here who knew you as human. It's safer to disappear entirely, start fresh somewhere new. The practicalities of their situation began to sink in as Clara looked around her cottage. The home she'd built in her final months of human life, now a relic of a person she no longer was. She felt a pang of loss for the simplicity of her mortal existence, but it was overwhelmed by excitement for the adventures that lay ahead. Where will we go? Clara asked. Wherever you want, Celine replied. I have properties scattered across the world, places where we can be safe while you learn to navigate your new existence. Paris if you want to walk the same streets as your favorite poets. Rome to see history layered in stone and marble. Or somewhere entirely new, where we can create our own stories. Clara stood and walked to the window, moving with the fluid grace that came naturally to her kind. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and pristine under starlight. She could see individual snowflakes with perfect clarity, could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit sheltering beneath the hedgerow 50 yards away. I want to see everything, she said, turning back to Celine with eyes that sparkled with silver fire. All the places you've been, all the wonders you've witnessed. I want to understand what it means to love someone for centuries instead of months. Celine rose and joined Clara at the window, wrapping her arms around her transformed lover from behind. They fit together perfectly, two creatures of the night finding solace in each other's eternal embrace. The world is different when you have forever to explore it, Celine murmured against Clara's ear. Less urgent but more precious. You notice details you missed when you were racing against time. Clara leaned back against Celine's chest, marveling at how right this felt. Not like becoming someone else, but like finally becoming who she was always meant to be. I'm not afraid, she said, surprise coloring her voice. I thought I would be terrified, but I feel free. Fear will come later, Celine warned gently. When the full weight of immortality settles on your shoulders, when you realize that everyone you knew as a human will age and die while you remain unchanged. But you won't face it alone. Clara turned in Celine's arms, studying the face that had become more precious to her than her own reflection. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that even in 100 years, even in 1,000, you'll still see me as Clara. Not just as another vampire, not as a reflection of yourself, but as me. Celine cupped Clara's face in her hands, thumbs tracing the elegant lines of her cheekbones. I promise. You are irreplaceable, irreducible, absolutely unique. Nothing about immortality will change that. They kissed then, their first kiss as equals, as two creatures sharing the same fundamental nature. It tasted different now, cooler, sharper, tinged with the metallic sweetness of vampire blood, but the love behind it was unchanged. If anything, it burned brighter, freed from the constraints of mortality and time. When they broke apart, Clara smiled, and Celine saw her own wonder reflected in those silver eyes. "So what happens now?" "Now," Celine said, "we pack what matters most and disappear into the night. We'll find you your first meal, teach you to hunt without causing harm, show you how to exist in the shadows between the human world and our own. And after that?" Celine's smile was full of promise and possibility. "After that we have forever to figure out together." They left Raven's Hollow before dawn, carrying only what could fit in Celine's ancient Mercedes and Clara's heart. The cottage was left as if its occupant had simply vanished. Dishes in the sink, books open on tables, a life interrupted rather than ended. Mrs. Holloway would find Clara's letter of resignation in the morning, along with a generous check and a story about a family emergency that required immediate relocation. Celine drove them north, toward the remote cabin she maintained in the Canadian wilderness. It was there, she explained, that Clara would learn to navigate her new existence away from curious eyes and potential complications. The cabin sat on 50 acres of pristine forest, far enough from civilization that Clara could practice her newfound abilities without risk of discovery. The hunger struck as they crossed the border, hitting Clara like a physical blow that left her doubled over in the passenger seat. It was unlike anything she'd experienced as a human, not the gentle gnawing of skipped meals, but a consuming fire that demanded immediate satisfaction. "Pull over," Clara gasped, her hands clenched into fists as she fought the urge to launch herself at Celine's throat. Celine guided the car to the shoulder of the empty highway, her own tension radiating through the confined space. She'd been expecting this moment, but that didn't make it any easier to watch Clara struggle with the fundamental nature of what she'd become. "Breathe," Celine instructed, though breathing was no longer necessary for either of them. "Focus on my voice, on the sound of the wind outside, on anything but the hunger." "I can smell it," Clara whispered, her voice strained. "Your blood, the blood of every living thing for miles around. It's like being surrounded by the most beautiful music and not being allowed to listen." Celine reached into the back seat and retrieved a thermos she'd prepared before they left. Animal blood from a local butcher, not ideal but sufficient to take the edge off Clara's first feeding frenzy. She handed it to Clara, who stared at it as if it might bite her back. "Dear blood," Celine explained. "It won't satisfy you completely, but it will help you think clearly enough to learn proper hunting techniques." Clara took the thermos with trembling hands and drank deeply, surprised by how good it tasted despite its room temperature and slightly metallic quality. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The fire in her veins banked to manageable levels, her thoughts clearing as the hunger receded. "Better?" Celine asked. Clara nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Is it always going to be this intense?" "The first few weeks are the hardest," Celine admitted. "Your body is still learning to process blood efficiently, and you haven't developed the control mechanisms that come with practice. But it gets easier, I promise." They reached the cabin as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Clara marveled at how the dawn light didn't burn her skin as vampire lore suggested it should. Another myth, Celine explained, though direct sunlight was still uncomfortable and would become more so as Clara's transformation completed itself. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, all exposed beams and river stone, with a massive fireplace that dominated the main room. Bookshelves lined every wall, and Clara recognized many of the titles from their conversations. Celine's personal collection, accumulated over centuries of solitary nights. "Welcome home," Celine said, though there was uncertainty in her voice. Clara explored the space slowly, running her fingers over book spines and handcrafted furniture, noting the way Celine had made this place a sanctuary from the world. She paused at a photograph on the mantelpiece. Celine in 1920s fashion, standing beside a woman Clara didn't recognize. Who was she? Clara asked. Celine joined her, studying the faded image. Catherine. A friend, not a lover. She was one of the few humans who knew what I was and didn't fear me for it. She lived to be 97, died peacefully in her sleep. I still miss her conversations. Clara heard the pain in Celine's voice, the weight of outliving everyone she'd ever cared about. She turned and took Celine's hands, intertwining their fingers. You won't have to miss me, Clara said simply. Whatever challenges immortality brings, we'll face them together. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of learning and discovery. Celine taught Clara to hunt humanely, how to approach deer and other large animals, how to feed without killing, how to erase the memory of the encounter so the animal could continue its life untraumatized. Clara proved to be a quick study, her natural empathy extending even to her prey. More challenging was learning to control her enhanced senses. The first time Clara tried to read a book, the words seemed to leap off the page in overwhelming clarity. The first time she tried to sleep, every sound within a mile radius invaded her consciousness like an unwelcome symphony. Even her own reflection required adjustment. The silver eyes, the preternatural stillness, the way shadows seemed to cling to her like living things. I feel like I'm wearing someone else's skin, Clara confessed one evening as they sat before the fire, her head in Celine's lap. That feeling will pass, Celine assured her, stroking Clara's dark hair. The person you are inside hasn't changed, you're just learning to inhabit a new version of yourself. How long did it take you to feel normal again? Celine considered the question. Normal is relative when you're immortal. But comfortable in my own skin? About 6 months. The hunger becomes manageable, the senses learn to filter information automatically, and you stop jumping at every sound. Clara was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Tell me about the bad parts. The things you haven't mentioned yet. Celine's hand stilled in Clara's hair. Why do you want to know? Because I need to understand what I've chosen. All of it, not just the romantic fantasy of forever. So Celine told her about the isolation, how it felt to watch decades pass while remaining unchanged, how difficult it was to form connections with mortals who would inevitably age and die. She spoke of the periodic need to reinvent herself, to create new identities and abandon old lives before people noticed her lack of aging. She described the hunters who still stalked their kind, driven by ancient prejudices and modern fears. And sometimes, Celine said quietly, sometimes you'll wish you could die. Not because you're in pain, but because the weight of existence becomes too much to bear. Those are the darkest moments, when forever feels like a curse instead of a gift. Clara absorbed this information without flinching. Have you felt that way recently? Not since I met you, Celine replied honestly. You've given me a reason to want forever again. Clara sat up and faced Celine, her silver eyes serious. Then we'll take care of each other. When the darkness comes for you, I'll be your light. When it comes for me, you'll guide me through it. They kissed then, sealing their promise with the kind of tenderness that transcends physical desire. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing their sanctuary in pristine silence. Inside, two immortal hearts synchronized their rhythm with the ancient dance of love, choosing courage over despair, together over alone. Clara had died as a human and been reborn as something else entirely. But in Celine's arms, surrounded by books and firelight and the promise of countless tomorrows, she finally understood what it meant to be truly alive. Spring came late to the Canadian wilderness, but when it arrived, it transformed the world around their cabin into something magical. Clara had been immortal for 4 months now, and the worst of her transition pains had faded into memory. She moved through her new existence with growing confidence, hunting with precision, controlling her enhanced senses, even beginning to enjoy the unique perspectives that immortality provided. They spent their evenings reading to each other, exploring the vast library Celine had accumulated over centuries. Clara discovered a love for ancient poetry that her mortal self had never had time to develop, while Celine found herself seeing familiar texts through Clara's fresh eyes, noticing nuances that had escaped her in previous readings. It was during one of these reading sessions that Clara made a discovery that changed everything. "Celine," she said, looking up from a leather-bound journal she'd found tucked between volumes of Shakespeare. "Whose handwriting is this?" Celine glanced over from her own book, a first edition of Jane Austen that Clara had been admiring, and her expression grew soft. "Wine. I started keeping journals in the 1600s, when I realized how easily details of mortal lives could fade from memory." Clara studied the elegant script, noting how it had evolved over the centuries from formal copperplate to more modern cursive. "May I read them? If you want to understand who I was before I became who I am with you, yes." Clara spent the next week immersed in Celine's journals, reading 4 centuries of experiences, observations, and carefully recorded emotions. She learned about the vampire's early years of confusion and isolation, her gradual acceptance of her nature, the loves and losses that had shaped her into the woman Clara knew. But it was the most recent entries that brought tears to Clara's eyes, pages and pages describing their courtship from Celine's perspective, written with the wondering tone of someone discovering they were still capable of surprise. October 15th, I met someone today. A mortal woman with kind eyes and clumsy hands who collided with me like fate itself. I should stay away from her, but I find myself hoping our paths will cross again. November 3rd, Clara. Her name is Clara, and it suits her perfectly. She looks at me without fear, speaks to me without artifice. I am in grave danger of caring for her. December 20th, I am lost. Completely, utterly lost. She dances with me in her cottage, and for the first time in centuries, I remember what it feels like to be alive. I love her. God help me, I love her more than I have ever loved anything. January 28th, she is dying. My beautiful, brave Clara is dying, and she has asked me to save her. I am terrified of making the same mistake I made with Isabel, but I am more terrified of losing her. Tomorrow night we will discover whether love is enough to bridge the gap between life and death. Clara closed the journal and looked across the room at Celine, who was pretending to read while actually watching Clara's reactions. "You were afraid," Clara said. "Terrified," Celine confirmed. "I'd spent so long protecting myself from attachment that falling in love with you felt like stepping off a cliff. And now..." Celine set down her book and moved to sit beside Clara on the couch. "Now I know that some cliffs are worth the fall. You've taught me that immortality isn't about existing forever. It's about finding something worth existing for." Clara leaned into Celine's embrace, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "I want to add to your journals. Document our life together, create a record of what we build from this moment forward. You want to write our story? I want to write our stories. Plural. The adventures we'll have, the places we'll go, the ways we'll grow and change together over the centuries." Clara smiled up at Celine. "You've given me forever. I want to fill it with meaning." They made love that night with the desperate tenderness of two people who had found their perfect match against impossible odds. Afterward, they lay entwined before the dying fire, talking about the future with the luxury of people who actually had one. "Where do you want to go first?" Celine asked, trailing her fingers through Clara's dark hair. "Paris," Clara said without hesitation. "I want to walk the streets where Colette wrote, see the sun rise from the Eiffel Tower, drink wine that's older than most countries." "And after Paris?" "Everywhere. I want to see the northern lights from Iceland, watch the cherry blossoms bloom in Japan, stand in libraries that have preserved human knowledge for millennia. Clara's voice grew dreamy with possibility. I want to learn languages I've never heard of, read books that haven't been translated, meet other immortals who might have stories to share. Celine smiled, infected by Clara's enthusiasm. You make eternity sound like an adventure instead of a burden. Isn't it? Clara turned to face Celine fully. We have unlimited time to explore every corner of this world, to witness history as it unfolds, to love each other through changes we can't even imagine yet. How is that not the greatest adventure possible? As dawn approached, they moved to their bedroom, drawing the heavy curtains that would protect them from the day's harsh light. Clara settled into Celine's arms with the contentment of someone who had found their home in another person rather than a place. I love you, Clara whispered as sleep claimed her. I love you too, Celine replied. In this life and every one that follows. Outside their sanctuary, the world continued its ancient dance of seasons and centuries. Mortals and immortals, love and loss. But inside, two hearts that beat in perfect synchronization had found something rarer than immortality itself. They had found forever in each other. My dearest younger self, I am writing this letter 50 years after the night I died and was reborn in Celine's arms. As I pen these words, I am sitting in a small cafe in Prague, watching snow fall on cobblestones that have witnessed centuries of human drama. Celine is across from me, sketching the scene outside our window, and I am struck once again by how beautiful she becomes when she's lost in creative pursuit. You're probably wondering if I regret the choice we made in that cottage in Raven's Hollow. The answer is complicated, as most truthful answers are. There have been dark moments, times when the weight of immortality felt crushing, when we watched dear friends age and die while we remained unchanged. We faced hunters who see us as monsters, other vampires who view our love as weakness, and our own occasional doubts about whether we made the right choice. But Clara, my sweet mortal self, I need you to know that every challenge has been worth it for the life we've built together. We've seen the northern lights paint the sky in colors that have no names. We've walked through the ruins of Pompeii at midnight, feeling the weight of all that preserved tragedy. We've danced in ballrooms that existed only in your dreams, spoken with artists and poets and philosophers whose names will outlive nations. Celine has taught me 7 languages, and I've taught her to see familiar wonders through fresh eyes. We've saved 3 other vampires from the despair of isolation, creating a small family of immortals who support each other through the endless years. We've learned that love doesn't diminish over centuries. It deepens, develops new facets, becomes something more complex and beautiful than we could have imagined in those early days of desperate passion. Last week, we received word that Mrs. Holloway passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 96. We returned to Raven's Hollow for her funeral, standing at the back of the church while the entire town mourned a woman who had touched countless lives with her kindness. Afterward, we visited our cottage, now owned by a young couple with 2 children and a dog. It felt strange to see that life continuing without us, but also right somehow. We had our time in that place, and now others were writing their own stories within those walls. Celine still keeps journals, and I've added my own voice to the record of our shared existence. Someday perhaps our story will inspire other couples facing impossible choices, other hearts wondering if love can truly conquer death. You're afraid, I know. Afraid of becoming a monster, afraid of losing yourself. Afraid that immortality will change you into someone you won't recognize. Those fears are valid. Transformation is never simple or painless. But you're also brave, braver than you give yourself credit for. You're choosing love over fear, adventure over safety, forever over never. Trust that bravery. Trust Celine. Trust yourself. The woman you become, the woman I am now, will surprise you. You'll discover strengths you didn't know you possessed, passions you couldn't explore in a single mortal lifetime, and a capacity for love that expands rather than diminishes with the passing years. You were once the light in Celine's world of shadows. Now we walk the night together, two immortal hearts creating our own constellation in the darkness. The end of your mortal life was really just the beginning of everything that mattered most. With all my love across time, Claire. Keep reading poetry. The words will mean different things when you have centuries to truly understand them.